Gentlemen, welcome back to the shop. This is going to be an update video of sorts because it has been a long time since I've made one of these videos, and a lot has gone on around here, like a lot, and a lot of that's never actually going to make it into a real video. So I figured I'd make something kind of short and sweet to cover these projects. I'm going to have to break this up into a couple of parts. This first part's going to be mainly about this shed here, and you know, since my wheels got stolen, that's where a lot of my attention has been going. And you know what? I think it really shows. Let's begin. So the first thing I actually want to talk about is the positioning of the shed. Those of you with keen eyes will have noticed that the backdrop in that video doesn't quite look the same as what it used to be. What I'm standing on right now is actually the previous shed slab, if you can call it that. And that's basically just a bunch of used patio blocks. It was always in the cards to move the shed to a new location, and last summer was actually when I made that happen. The job itself was rather intense, and it involved getting the building, off the ground, which involved a lot of fiddling around with shimming with bricks and using a car jack. And while I was at it, I actually decided to insulate the floor, and of course, I used EPS foam, and for some reason I decided to use some spray foam in all the cracks. And that was a job that took, well, a few days under there getting covered in spray foam, and well, let's just say it was a little bit unpleasant.
Fun times.
But after that grueling, brutal work got done, it was time to actually move the thing, which is, easier said than done, seeing as it's it may be an 8x10 building, but it's a building, right? So I had to use a come along, right? Basically a, cable jack of sorts to manually crank it across the yard.
Coming up to the, yeah, we're coming up to the lip.
It's almost there.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's going good, it's going good. Hardly any tension.
Wood's crushing pretty good.
Oh yeah, heavy.
Hard. And continually it would fall off bricks, or and lots of work with the car jack, lots of work with the come along, and where we ended up, things actually became, well, even more difficult, because I had to move from the brick patios of yore to, well, it's an ice rink right now, but grass, right? And although the building was on 4 industrial grade casters, those things would sink into the ground the moment you let it down. So what we needed to do is actually to construct 3/4 plywood tracks to essentially guide the shed to its position. And that involved jacking it up, placing the tracks and letting it down, moving it a few feet, jacking it, so on and so forth, till eventually we had to change directions and start going back that way. And then, making the slab itself was, well, it was even a bigger job. That involved me cutting the grass with a knife manually and ripping it out by hand, loading it into a wheelbarrow, and rinse and repeat. So eventually I had a 12-foot by 15-foot patch of bare soil, which needed to be prepared. And that involved bringing in gravel. Of course, couldn't get a truck back here without completely destroying the yard, so that meant hauling it over wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, and I actually ended up breaking my phone on the job because I was shoveling and I leaned on the tailgate of the truck and my phone broke. Go figure. But basically shoveling wheelbarrow and wheelbarrow of gravel, and I believe it ended up being somewhere around the range of 2 yards to get a few inches of gravel, and then running a soil compactor across that. Let's see if I can show you the clips for all of this. And eventually, once we had that, fine compacted gravel base, we had to get a bunch of sand on here and smooth it out to actually put down these patio blocks. The decision was made to use patio blocks because they were non-permanent. Realistically, they're pretty permanent, but as it turns out, I think it would have actually been easier and probably even cheaper just to pour 4, maybe 6 inches of concrete. So lesson learned on that one. Well, that was a huge job, and that took a few weeks, but there was still a lot more to be done to this place. Now, Winnipeg isn't actually known for being a particularly warm climate. However, this summer was unusually warm, and I was caught in a situation where my well-insulated building was becoming very, very uncomfortable. What happened is the sunlight would come and it would bake my roof, bake my walls, bake everything around me to the point where, sort of in the later part of the evening, the shed would consistently track to well above 30 degrees centigrade, maybe 35 degrees, which is very, very uncomfortable. I was just sitting down in there and, sweating unbearably. So of course I needed to find a solution. Initial thoughts were window air conditioner. So I did what any, reasonable person would do. I cored a couple of holes in the back of the wall and put it outside and tried to, ghetto some hillbilly ductwork to get it operational. Not a smart move at all. So I was left with basically something that I spent, a good amount of time doing, putting together wooden boxes and filters and just this really convoluted crap system. And I didn't really have a functional product. And I just thought about it and I'm like, you know what, this is really stupid. What I'm doing is a really dumb idea. Cut my losses, change course, right? So of course, what are the alternatives? Forget all that crap, cut a hole in the wall, stick an AC in there. No, I wasn't gonna desecrate this thing that I worked so hard on by cutting a big hole in it and, sticking a window AC in there. Because then, of course, I had this, loud rattle trap, basically, that also leaks a bunch of air, no doubt, and could even end up damaging my walls if the water isn't managed properly. So what are the alternatives? You get a real system that's really meant to do the job. So this is a heat pump here. It'll operate down to minus 30 degrees centigrade. And instead of me creating heat, essentially by, a resistive heater, I'm using this thing to suck it right out of the air and dump it inside the building, even at, 30 below. And, so far the math is indicating that I'll end up cutting the power consumption for the heating part of this in half. And heating is most of the energy consumption of this shed right here, of course. So massive energy savings. And you know what? This thing's way better than a window AC. Doesn't rattle, it's very quiet. I don't want to spouse off too much on this because I'll be making a video on it later, a whole series, including measuring it and talking about energy efficiency and performance and, all those goodies. But just know that this thing is way better than, my wildest dreams. The absolute relief I got when I grabbed the remote, I hit on, and I bumped down the temperature more and more and more down to 17 degrees centigrade. And then a few hours later, I walked in my shop, dead quiet. The thing's just blowing frigid cold air. And the place is the coldest, coldest room I've ever been in. That was incredible. And I'm really glad I made this decision. And, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Be patient. This place is a little bit cluttered and messy, because a lot's going on right now, but a lot of changes were made. I ripped off all the drywall on the first level, and I went and made a whole bunch of changes to the wiring. So now I have an on-off switch for my lights. Didn't have that before. I had to add wiring for the lights I installed outside. I had to add more wiring for an additional fan, an intake fan. And of course I had to add an additional wire for my subwoofer on the first level here. The main reason for opening up the walls was to put in one of these, a real, actual breaker panel. Don't get me wrong, this place still isn't legit and it never will be, but a real breaker panel means that I can have my, 240 volts. I can have my breaker for my mini split, I can rerun all my wires, and I can install this because this needed 240 volts to run it. And you know what? I was tired of using a single 15 amp extension cord to run the entire building because I'd be using, 15 amps basically to run my heater, and I would only have a few amps left over for my lights and everything else. With this now, I actually have 30 amps on both phases for this place. This thing doesn't use more than 5, which means I have 25 amps left over. I'm running two 20 amp circuits, and I have an additional 240 volt outlet on the outside. And basically, you can see where this is going. I have a lot more power available. I also went and decided to install some additional comfort items, including this hammock here for when I want to kind of lay down during class, and I decided to also install this. This is more security than anything, and it basically keeps people from seeing this extremely well lit area with nice speakers in it and stuff and thinking, oh, I want to rob that. This is still manually operated, but I do actually have a plan in place that I want to implement where it'll basically detect the light outside and manually roll it up when the sun comes up. And that's way I will be getting the maximum energy efficiency out of this window as possible, whilst maintaining the whole security aspect of it. Well, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I decided I had to keep this short and sweet, and that's why, if you guys want to know more, I'll actually be seeing you guys next video, in which I talk about even more regarding the shed here, mainly cosmetic stuff, and there's actually a lot more to talk about regarding the rest of the property, specifically pertaining to electrical and energy efficiency. I'll see you guys next time.